Ben will answer questions, right? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Good question.
How long does it take you on average to write a poem?
I don't know what the average is. I mean, I tend to think of the book as the unit of composition. For whatever reason, I tend to write kind of serial poems that take up a whole book. So a few years, I think, in that sense. But I don't really know how I know when a poem is finished, so it's hard for me to have a clear sense of the average time of composition. But certainly it's unpredictable. Like sometimes a poem happens and usually it doesn't, no matter how many hours you spend in front of the screen.
In some of your later poems, you kept mentioning the artist Nina Simone. What inspired you to write about her in your poems?
I mean, the truest answer is just this feeling of being kind of at the total mercy of her power as a singer, right? I mean, she just seems like she has an overwhelmingly beautiful style and range. But more specifically, it is that range, and also the way that when I was little and I used to listen to Nina Simone, I thought it was a man's voice. And when I realized who she was and realized it was a woman's voice, I had this interesting experience of her being able to sing in both genders. And something about her ability to kind of bend, gender dynamics also became a kind of figure for me of bending genre and not feeling kind of trapped in any particular identity. So, I mean, she can do anything. She can sing, jazz, and she can sing spirituals, and she can sing the Beatles. She also covers people really effectively in really odd ways. And I like that idea of that kind of aesthetic ventriloquism, right? Where you're both paying homage to someone by inhabiting their song, but also making it your own through some kind of subtle signature or some quality of your voice. So those are the things that come immediately to mind, is the way that her voice seems to contain, like I was saying, its own contradictions, like its own other, and to reconcile them at moments that are really powerful.
Do you have a consistent strategy when you're engaging an audience like us? Obviously, there's a lot of information going in and out of poems. I was just wondering if, I guess, the rapidity of a lot of the information is something that you do on purpose.
I don't have a strategy. I'm open to suggestions. I mean, the new thing is really hard to read. The rest of the book is even harder to read because lines are really often in like several possible orders simultaneously. So it's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure reading experience. But when you vocalize it, right, it's like kind of impossible to capture that plurality of possible readings, right? And I mean, there's a little of that in the section I read, but in the second section of the book, there's a ton of that. And so it poses kind of problems for reading. But I mean, generally, I hope that like the sound qualities of the work or the fragments will come into focus, even or maybe especially in a quick reading where you can't synthesize all the available information. So to a certain degree, you just have to go for affect and let it kind of break over you. And also, I mean that's like our general condition, right? This overwhelming saturation of information that we can't possibly puzzle out. So I don't know if it's an excuse I come up with after the fact, but I like to think that maybe the work is mimetic of the saturation to a certain degree, right? But I don't know. I mean, I always read like this last thing. Whenever I hear myself read, I'm either horrified by how slowly I read, because I was telling myself the whole time to slow down, or I'm equally horrified by how quickly I read, because I was telling myself the whole time that I wasn't going to read too slowly again. But you guys already know which one of those I did, but I don't.
Was it like growing up in Kansas?
I really loved, I loved a lot of things about Topeka. It was very open and it wasn't very stratified and kind of in terms of class. there wasn't a lot of exclusivity because there wasn't really any place to ban anyone from. And I like the land and the 4 distinct seasons, and so I feel it was great to grow up there, but it also is a remarkably violent place. It became a remarkably violent place. It's one of these Midwestern cities that's a major meth hub. And I got really interested in the particular form of violence that seemed to be general to me there, which was this kind of like purposeless, like middle-class white kids who were armed and bored. And it struck me as a distinctly kind of American pandemic. And a lot of my first book, I think, comes out of that sense of violence kind of coming to fill like an identity vacuum or something. I don't have a compelling theory for why this happens, but it marked me the different languages that I spoke in Kansas. I spoke at home in a house full of books and music, or might speak in high school when I was trying to be tough, and then when I got to college and learned academic discourses, the way those languages pushed and pulled against each other really shows up in the first book, which I feel like is the book that's most centered in Topeka in a certain way, because it was the first poetry I wrote when I left. By the way, there's like a totally improbable number of interesting writers